Hey, this is Ben from Dreamer. I'm just chatting here to Luke SERDER from BREC Energy. How you going, Luke?
Well, thanks, Ben. How are you?
I'm very good, very good. So could you tell us a little bit about BREC, please? That'd be great.
Yeah, cool. So BREC Electrical started with Ben Russell about 8-9 years ago. He started to take on some small projects and then grew out to be, a team of 15, 20 guys, and found himself in a niche market of doing some super high-end or architecturally controlled projects. I moved over from South Australia about 3-ish years ago. I hit up one of my architect mates who introduced me to Ben, and we went out for a cup of coffee, and it was almost love at first sight. We got along very well, and I came on as a subcontractor working for Ben, and then slowly evolved into project managing my own jobs, and then started as a project manager for him, and then became kind of financially involved in the solar aspect. We created another company called BREC Energy, which primarily focuses on delivering, good quality solar and battery jobs for clients, mainly projects. So we kind of assist architects and builders throughout projects for solar and battery.
Cool. And why do you do it? Why do you find it exciting?
Well, why do I do it right now? I like to help people, and I just like people in general. And I find that in our kind of niche market of the industry, which is kind of that high-end resi, a little bit of multi-res as well, some architects just, they get the principles of solar, but they don't really understand it. So I kind of offer my services and sit down and spend some time with the people who, see solar as a grey area, because I understand it really well. I can explain it simply to them. So I sit down for a few hours, and I kind of cap it at a few hours, because energy is a pretty boring topic to most, so I'll lose people pretty quickly. So I've got to keep it theatrical and relatable. I just kind of help people understand solar and the good things that come out of solar. Everyone's heard a lot of bad stories, so I don't think people like to commit to it. But it's a concept that works, and with the right education, and that's what I enjoy educating people. You can get a lot more out of solar when you know a lot more about it. So it's, the transaction that most companies offer, which is a transaction, I offer an experience of sitting down with someone and explaining and elaborating and, giving different scenarios of how you can get the most out of it.
Sure. And what's the most difficult thing for people to understand about solar?
Just the expectations of what it can do for you and your pocket. There's some misleading salespeople out there saying, "Oh, you've got solar now, you can use as much power as you want." It's not the case. In an ideal world, we'd like to analyze a bit of your consumption data and then overlap the solar system above that, just to see how it's going to stand up against what you currently use. The avenue of this industry that I'm in is I'm project based. So the $1 million question that I get asked kind of before the build gets started is, what size solar system do I need to eliminate my electricity bills? The thing is, I don't know what your electricity bills look like, so I can't really give you any advice on what size it needs to be. One thing that I'm doing of late is kind of telling the clients or the architect to maybe kind of cool their jets a little bit and look at solar a little bit further down the track, being mindful about the client's capital expense. There's no point covering their roof in solar thinking that that's how much solar we need to eliminate their bills. I kind of say, look, let's run all the cables we need to run for the largest system possible, analyze some data, and then execute the solar system from there. So capital expense is probably the biggest thing that I try to focus on.
Yeah, okay, Cool. And where do you think, where's solar going? What do you see as the future of solar currently?
Future of solar, some more efficient products, really. So more power from a smaller footprint. Okay, and the industry is moving pretty quickly. We're only getting 400 watts of power out of the standard kind of solar panel footprint.
Yeah.
At the moment is a massive change in the last 10 years. Fast forwarding 10 years, how big is a 400 watt solar panel going to be? Is it going to be half the size and therefore half the roof? So it's going to be a little bit more open to people with smaller houses and not too much of a roof face.
Is there any particular panels we should be looking at over other panels? Is there a couple that are market leaders?
Manufacturers?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'll look at SunPower. They're the guys who make the 400 watt panel in the kind of 1650, 1700 by a meter footprint. They're not a cheap panel. They're a very efficient and bulletproof panel. But we only ever suggest those guys if the client asks, what's the best on the market? I want that. Or if we're really struggling with space on a roof, we'll suggest that just to get the most kind of kick out of the solar system we possibly can, if the client needs.
Sure.
Yeah. Again, capital expense is very important. Only spend the money.
It sounds like that's really key in trying to get a system up with a client, is just making sure the balance is right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you never want to ask how much money have you got to spend on this investment. You kind of feel that out, but what I need to do is protect the performance of the solar system at all costs. Yes, it needs to look good, and it needs to work well, but that's the main thing. If someone's going to be asking me what my advice is and my opinion of what they should do, I need to protect the performance of the solar system. And that's, looking not just at solar, but a battery. I need to analyze that client's data as much as possible to give them kind of my hand on heart advice that yes, you should invest in a battery, because it's not, installing a battery on someone's house doesn't suit every lifestyle if they're looking at that investment for like a self-consumption perspective. Some people want a battery just for backup purposes. And we installed a battery not too long ago for a client in Armidale where they don't use their battery and discharge it every night. They have their battery sitting there fully charged, waiting for a blackout. And mind you, not every house has a cellar with a $250,000 home theatre system, but they've got a sump pump that's in the cellar. There's a lot of water around the cellar walls, especially throughout winter. So if they ever lose power, they need that pump to continue to work. So this is just a smart way for those guys to protect their AV equipment. And the first time it kicked on and worked, the client rang me saying, "Hey, it worked. I've still got a cellar to play with." So
that's cool. Yeah.
When you're looking at it in that as a return on investment, it paid for itself straight away.
So did they feel that it was likely that there would be a rainstorm at the same time as a blackout, and that's why?
Well, they lived in that place prior to renovating it, and that was one of the issues that they had. I mean, in Armidale, it's a pretty reliable part of the network, but for some reason, once every 6 months or so, they lost power for 3 or 4 hours. And, they were mindful about that because they didn't have a cellar prior to that. And then when they had the cellar, they were worried about it. And that was the solution we came up with. I was quite upfront with them about, if they're using this to save money on their nighttime consumption, the solar system that they have isn't necessarily big enough to kind of charge that battery every single day of the year, not just summer, but over the winter months as well.
Yeah.
So, they were fully aware of that, and their investment was, viewed in a different perspective.
Right. So in regards to whether or not people should, getting that balance right and when to implement a solar system, and one of the things I've found slightly difficult to grapple with is just where that balance lies, I suppose, but also understanding if there's a moral, do we have a moral implication, do you think, or a moral imperative to put solar in even when it's not financially viable? Or how do you ever balance up that sort of question?
Yeah, look, some people just want solar because they think they're doing their part.
Yeah.
And yes, if their solar system is, if they're not home during the day, and it's only during the day that your solar system will be producing power. So everything that they produce, they don't need, so they'll export to the grid if your network operator allows you. So if you're exporting it to your grid, it's basically going straight to your neighbor if they want to use it, but their retailer will charge them. So it's a good way of not needing to turn on another gas or diesel or coal turbine to power your suburb. So yes, it does work. You just need to weigh up whether, if it suits your budget and you can do so, awesome, do it. But, it is an investment, and, most people do it to save money. Most people.
Okay. So would you like to tell us about, some interesting project you've done recently? That Armadale one sounds quite interesting, but is there any others that have been a bit unusual or different?
Yeah, we did. This was just before COVID popped its head up the first time. We did a pop-up coffee shop for Code Black just in front of the Red Steps in Freshwater Place.
Yeah, I saw it. It was great.
Yeah. So that was a little off-grid install that we did. It had 3 Tesla Powerwalls there and a couple of Fronius inverters, and it had like a valleyed roof with a box gutter. So we cleaned the panels as the best we could. When it rained, it collected the water and had about 2,000 litres of water storage, and through a filter that fed the water for a couple of coffee machines. If you brought your own coffee cup, you got a free coffee, and that was for Melbourne Design Week as why, with the architects behind it. And it was a really cool project. I think it was one of the first times that Tesla kind of cheekily announced their off-grid option for their battery.
What's their off-grid option?
Oh, look, it's the same battery. It's the brains and the gateway and the programming and commissioning is a little bit different.
Okay.
So you need to have your off-grid license in order to have that activated as a user or an installer. So there's a few boxes you need to tick for those guys to allow you to do it. Could
you tell us a bit more about that?
About the off-grid, or
just about so someone who's thinking about doing an off-grid house, what would they need to do to be able to do that?
Well, I mean, if you're building something out of town, you would inquire with the network operator, like say City Power or Gemini or AusNet, just to get a quote to get grid connection. And the people who engage any kind of off-grid contractor would have learned that it costs about $250,000 to get power to a very remote point. And $250,000, if you compare it to what it would buy you in a solar system, it could, it's huge. You could, $250,000 is a lot of money. So you might as well spend that money once and then power yourself for the rest of your time, as opposed to spend that money just to get electricity bills thereafter. And it's something you have to sit down with the client, and especially if they haven't built the place yet, you need to get a very solid understanding on what their consumption pattern will look like. You need to get a list of every appliance that's going to go in the house, how many family members are there, if they're thinking of expanding, because what you need to do, because they are off-grid, they're relying solely on that solar and backup battery. So you need to make sure that you size that system correctly, that they get to charge their batteries every day of the year. And keep in mind, we are in Melbourne. We do get very gloomy grey winters. So we need to make sure that we've got enough storage to accommodate a few days, because we may not get sunlight for a few days. So decent sized solar system, good batteries with good warranty and good lifespan. And also, worst case scenario, a good generator as well. You know, you could be spending at least 10 grand just on that avenue alone. So having an interview with the client and getting to know what they're doing, how they live, and when they live. So not just knowing how much power you use a day, but when you use that power in like half an hour increments, just so you can make sure that you can put up with the spikes in demand and deliver that when they need it. Because, you know, you can't just put 6 panels in a field and have a small little pull-up generator and a few car batteries. You know, that will work, but only if you're trying to charge a phone or watch your TV. That's it. Yeah.
All right. So tell us about tell us a little bit about the design process at BREC. I suppose we've touched on it a little bit already, but maybe give us just a quick overview of how you do it. Yeah, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I'm a bit of a control freak, but if I'm going to be putting my name to it, it's going to be working perfectly. So again, protecting the performance of the system. So from the very get-go, when I'm putting together a proposal, that's when I'll be doing the design of the system right there and then. And by the design, it's the string design, which way the panels are facing. You know, there's a question sheet that I would give an architect or a builder about the client, so I can manipulate the system accordingly.
Can you tell us some of the key things that we should be aware of?
In regards to the design of it.
Yeah. So like when you say about roof, you know, the way the roof faces or the roof pitch, or, you know.
Yeah, well, just as an example, let's, like if there was a mum and dad and 2 young kids who live in a house, and they've got an east-west kind of pitch roof.
Yeah.
And in the morning, mum and dad wake the kids up, have a cup of coffee, make some breakfast, and they leave the house by 8 o'clock in the morning. So there's a little bit of morning consumption happening in that household. And then nothing happens. The house sits at kind of this net consumption of the fridge running, things in standby. Not a lot of power is getting used until, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where, you know, mum does the school run, picks up the kids, comes home, and then maybe puts the heater on, or puts the air conditioner on, or the hydronic, or cooks dinner. You know, there's a lot of heavy hitting electrical loads happening at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So if we were to put the solar panels all on the east, that would be generating, you know, free solar power, and no one's there to use it. So what I would be doing is putting the majority of those solar panels facing west. So, you know, when the sun is in the afternoon sky and they're just getting home and using a lot of power, they'll be using their own power as opposed to buying power. Because typically, depending on your retailer, the peak pricing kicks in anywhere between, say, 4:30 p.m. and turns off about 9:30 p.m. So if we can educate our clientele or manipulate some solar panels facing west, they don't have to pay those peak pricing, or that, you know, use power in that peak pricing period.
So it sounds like the first thing to do in the design process is make sure you've got that brief absolutely nailed.
Yep, that's it. And lately I've been doing kind of solar workshops with architects or engineering firms, getting those guys to understand what I look for when designing a solar system. And I give them kind of like this 12-question sheet that I want those guys to ask their clients at concept stage. Because if they can manipulate the build from the very early onset, they can kind of manage the client's expectations of, you know, this can be a very green house if we do this, this, and this. And the questions that I ask the clients are, you know, when are you a family that goes to work all day, every day? Do you work from home? Are you going to, you know, are you going to have kids soon? Because, you know, a young family that has a new baby, you know, mum's going to stay home all day, every day, probably have the heating on all day. So their consumption pattern's going to look a little bit differently.
Sure.
And, you know, with that in mind, I would design the system to tailor that lifestyle.
Okay, so you've got the brief sorted. So what happens next?
What happens next? I get a price together on the parts that I feel the client should use.
Yeah.
And, you know, depending on the architect that they're engaging, you kind of know the budget of the end client. You know, some people just want the best on the market. Some people just want to tick a box, which is fine. I mean, everything will work. It's just that some products will work better in the fluctuating temperatures that we get here in Australia. I'll put the price together, but You know, if it's a big house in Toorak, when I'm putting the price together, when the plans are getting drawn up, I feel like the system won't be getting installed and commissioned for maybe another 18 months. So what I try to suggest is, okay, this is how much this system will cost, and I'll put a proper proposal together. So look, this system will cost this much, but let's not commit to this just yet. You know, we've got a budget of, this is a hypothetical, of $30,000 here that I think this solar system is going to cost you. Let's have that as a provisional cost and reapproach this a little bit closer to when the solar system is actually going to be installed, because between now and then, it's such a fast moving industry, there's going to be different products available. So let's not kind of, lock into anything right now.
Sure.
Let's know how much we're going to spend and then look at it a little bit later.
Yeah.
Because again, protect the performance of the system. There's no point putting an 18-month-old system on a new house. I'd rather, have the bee's knees going in there.
So you've done your brief, you do your proposal, and then when do you start actually designing the system? And how do you do that?
It's already designed.
Okay.
From there, yeah. So I would be actually, we've got some quoting software that we use. We would overlap the solar panels on different roof faces, and depending on the pitch of the roof and the angle of the roof, ideally we want a solar panel facing true north at about 30 degrees. Okay. So that's 30 degrees. That's the happy medium between the summer and winter suns. The flatter the panel on the roof, that panel is going to be great over summer. But when you think about the winter sun, which hits about 30 degrees off the horizon, it's a pretty steep gradient of that sun hitting the panel. So your winter production isn't going to be anywhere near as good as your summer production. And typically, your winter electricity bills are greater than your summer.
Okay, cool.
So these are the kind of things that you need to advise on with the architect or builder when they're thinking about building a place.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, so it's already designed from the get-go. We just kind of overlap that in our quoting tool, and it will give us, it will spit out a production estimate based on which way the solar panels are facing.
Cool. I'll just ask you one final question. And so we've just coincidentally had a project that might be going ahead that's for an off-the-grid house in Heathcote or near Heathcote. And so I suppose if people are thinking about doing a job like that or building a house that might be off the grid, is there any benefit or better way to go in terms of having the solar panels on the roof of a house? Or is there a benefit to having the solar panels on some other structure nearby to the house? What's the best way to set up something?
Yeah, look,
like
you can put the panels anywhere.
Yeah.
Some people don't like the look of it. For example, we're doing an off-grid job at the moment in Woolamai, and the client didn't want to see the panels at all. So the solar panels are 150 meters away from the house, or from the car where batteries are getting stored. So the only thing we need to be mindful of then is kind of making sure you're getting the correct voltage from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't just run a small cable in such a long distance. You need to make sure the cross-sectional area of the cable can put up with the volt drop. So you just have to spend a bit of extra money. So this guy spent about $7,000 extra just because he didn't want to see his panels, and we had to trench 150 meters and put these big thick cables underground to avoid that. And look, it will still work fine. It will work just as good as if you put it on your house. You just need to counteract the volt drop and make sure it works well that way.
Sorry, one more, Luke. So what do you think, how do we get more people using solar and having more renewable energy in the grid?
Well, more renewable energy on the grid from rooftop solar is tricky. It can create a lot of grid instability.
Okay.
Excuse me, sorry. If you saturate an area with a lot of rooftop solar, it's hard to manage on the grid's perspective. It'll push the voltage up a little bit or have a little bit of voltage rise. Just making systems cheaper or having more subsidies there are a lot of cheap systems out there, but you do get what you pay for. But I mean, with anything in life, you get what you pay for, but specifically with solar, the quality of the install goes down as well, because, you know, that race to the bottom, everything is bottom dollar. And I think that's what gives the industry a bit of a, I don't know, a bit of a blemish, because there's a few cowboys out there doing it for next to nothing, and it looks next to nothing and it fails. And, you know, if you do your job poorly, especially in our game, you can start a fire, you can burn a house down, you can potentially kill somebody. So, you know, cheaper systems, is that the way to go? No. Making it more readily available. Look, it's hard. Look, it doesn't, you know, it costs money, and not everyone has that expense. So yeah, subsidies will probably be the only way to go on my perspective.
Okay, yeah. So it seems like some additional support from, like, a bit more of a top-down approach from government might assist as well. Yeah,
that's it. And look, I mean, let's just shut our eyes and imagine that there is some subsidies going in, and everyone has solar. The things that would need to be implemented there would maybe be zero export or very little export. And what I mean by that is, if you're not home and your solar system producing energy, not allowing that energy to go back into the grid, because, you know, it is difficult for network operators to manage all of that happening at the one time.
Yeah.
And I mean, the way that you set up export control is you need a smart meter which is marrying up with your inverter. And what that smart meter does is actually measure electricity running through the mains coming into the house, because it'll recognize when the power is going out of the house. And then it will just kind of cull production within the inverter. And with smart monitoring devices, it usually comes up on your phone, and when you get introduced to it properly, you can, when it's set up properly, on some mediums, you can actually have a live electricity bill 24 hours a day, and you can kind of see when you're spiking in consumption or when you're exporting, and that kind of keeps you accountable. I mean, you know, some clients will look at their phone when they're at work, and their wife might be home, and then people see the kind of the spike in electricity happening. Hey, babe, what are you doing? What are you using? Like, it keeps you accountable about how much power you're using. If you can put it to a dollar figure, kind of line straight away. So more of that with every install would be great. I mean, it's relatively cheap to set up. Some mediums are quite expensive, but if everyone kind of saw live what they're doing, it keeps you accountable, and because it's hitting your pocket straight away. You know, if you're using the oven and you see it costs you $1 for an hour's usage, you think, oh shit, you know, if I use that every single day for 30 days, there's 30 to 50 bucks just in one avenue of me using my power, and that's just your oven.
Sure, totally. Well, we might leave it there, Luke. Thank you so much for the chat. It was really interesting to hear about the work you're doing, and look forward to working with you again soon.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Look forward to it too. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Luke. See ya.